Well, you've made it all the way to the last three chapters. Friends, family, and romantic partners. In this chapter, we're going to look at communication in friendships, in family, and in romantic relationships. Previously, we were introduced to the NAPS model of relational maintenance. This will take us just a step deeper. We're going to identify different types of friendship, the communication, how it plays in maintaining the friendships, how communication creates and sustains relationships within families, and the ways in which love is expressed in romantic relationships. A friendship is a voluntary relationship. It's voluntary because based on multiple criteria, we choose to be in these relationships. They can be short relationships, short-term, long-term relationships with friends. Some of these friendships might last for years, even a lifetime, and others may fade and just be around for a season. And that sometimes makes it difficult for us to understand. I remember being upset as relationships that I thought I would have for a lifetime changing and shifting. And part of it was maturity, that I didn't understand the changes. But it's really important to understand what the types of friendship or how they influence our lives and our communication, not only about the relationship, but amongst other relationships. So understanding that some relationships are short term and some are long term is important. A task versus a maintenance oriented relationship. There are some relationships that only revolve around a certain shared activity. That would be task. For example, I might be working on a project together for 6 months or 8 months with the team, and over that time you develop relationships. But once you're done with that project and you get sent to another one, you don't keep in touch. Whereas a maintenance-oriented friendship is grounded in mutual liking, you provide social support, you're independent of each other, and you share activities. So the relationship that's based on maintenance oriented is a much more on the longer term. Low disclosure versus high disclosure is the extent to which the friend knows, whether it's personal or it's general information about you. So in a longer term relationship, in a maintenance oriented relationship, you're probably going to have more high disclosure. Whereas in that project relationship or friendship, there's going to be very low self-disclosure. Then we look at low versus high obligation. And high obligation friends are those who would do just about anything for you. And those that are low obligation are the ones that would not. So you can already start to think about the people in your life, the friends, and which category they fit in the communication models. And then we have infrequent and frequent contact relationships. So this captures the extent to which we are likely to keep in touch with others. And I like to add this caveat here because I have friends, mind you, I'm in my 6th decade, so I have friends from high school who we do not see each other or talk to each other every year, but we'll probably get in touch every other year for sure, or we might remember our birthdays once a year. However, that relationship is infrequent, but yet it's a high disclosure because we've known each other since we were 13 and we've shared throughout these years many experiences, but it's not frequent. So it develops over time, this layer of connection for us. But most of the time, infrequent connections are very low on the disclosure, can be task focused, and quite short term. So looking at friendship attraction elements, what brings us together? What makes this friendship come together? Gender, communication. Same-sex friendships tend to be the first friendships people have. And communication differs by gender. The way men communicate and the way women communicate is different, but they also have found in research that women tend to bond through mutual self-disclosure, while men generally create intimacy through shared activities. Research also suggests that both men and women value same-sex friendships for emotional support and for shared activities. So as you review this slide, look at some of these points that are highlighted here. Similar hobbies, similar perspectives like politics, religion, similar sense of humor maybe would be important, I think, in friendships and communication emphasis, because someone may like SNL but someone may not, and it can establish a type of clash. Take a moment to look at the points on this slide. I think it's helpful for you to be able to identify them. We also need to look at cross-sex friendships that offer benefits for both sexes, but they also can present some challenges for heterosexuals. It can also present challenges for LGBTQ. So we need to think about what are the benefits of each of our choices in the relationships. So I think regardless of the potential sexual attraction, we're going to have some of these challenges, but there's also some great benefits in our friendships. So in a work spouse relationship, it's very close. There's some special connections there. In a close platonic friendship, maybe with a coworker, just someone in your neighborhood, there could be a very high emotional bond, high disclosure, more honesty in these types of relationships. So we recognize that we have these different types of relationships, and we need to, in our journey of becoming competent communicators, we need to understand those differences clearly. Sometimes they can get clouded and cause conflicts. So be clear on those relationships that you have. Friends with benefits. This is I don't know if it's still a popular term, but it identifies that it might include a sexual activity, but not necessarily. It could be, let me think about my age group. So I'm in my 60s, so I'm on the younger side of maybe my friends that are now in their 70s, late 70s and 80s. So for them, the benefit may not be sexual. The benefit is that I can bend down easily to pick up a box or to move something or to carry something out further from the distance from the car trunk into a condominium. So that could be a benefit in a friendship where I'm just going to help someone that's much older than me. So I just wanted to broaden that idea. It could also be with a person with a disability, and there's a benefit in having someone that's fully able. So men and women are identified to be most likely in relationships with benefits, but how we're defining this in the past has been mostly sexual, but I believe that's changing. I believe there's other relationships that engage in different benefits. Often friends with benefits will avoid discussing any specifics, like they're just there to help. Even if it was a sexual friend with benefits relationship or just a helping, there's not as much intimacy or closeness. So in consideration, sex role is important as masculinity and femininity affect our communication within our friendships. Sexual orientation, choices of types of relationships or partners. I believe that it's all shaped around the concept of friendship and interaction. However that is, I think that we are all human beings, that we like to be connected, and communication is a major part of how we connect. It's just breaking down these pieces and understanding not only what you just hear that it should be, but what are you experiencing and what does that mean for you? What are your traditions, your values, your beliefs, and what are the things that you share? So it all comes together. So there are other friendships that are based on maybe just gender or an affinity group that you share being members of a particular group. I belong to a women's organization called Las Comadres Inland Empire, and it's a group of Latina women who come together and we support each other. We meet once a month. We come from multiple different backgrounds, different careers, and we just come together to talk about how the month went, or if you need help with something, we all work together collectively. So we're comadres, las comadres. And so that is my group, my affinity group that I connect with. I also have an affinity group at my church. Being a mother that has lost a young adult child due to an automobile accident, I'm very connected with Grief Share. So I have worked through some of my own grief, but I love being able to help other parents or other individuals that have had a major loss in their life. So that's another affinity group that's important to me to remain connected to. So communication and friendships, we can have the cross-sex friendships, whether it's work, friends with benefits, mutual allies, or just other friendships based on multiple layers that I mentioned. We understand that cross-sex friendships offer some benefits for both sexes, but it can also present challenges. So we want to keep that in mind as we navigate through our communication journey. But how much time does it really take to develop or forge a casual relationship, a close relationship? What's required once you start to spend more time together? And how important is the communication? Not just the quantity, but the quality of the communication in building and maintaining the relationship. We just go through our day to day and don't stop and think about these details that are really important. And research has found that it's important in relational maintenance to consider and be thoughtful and intentional about the relationships that we're allowing to come in and to leave our lives. Soul Pancake is a short video that you can watch. Again, you'll have to go to the PowerPoint slide in the module to get the link. But consider the topics that are addressed. It's focused on cross-sex friendships. Do you agree? Do you disagree with this conclusion? Can men and women be just friends? Well, my personal opinion is the answer is yes. But there are other individuals, different cultures that have different opinions about that. What are yours? We are reminded that communication in successful friendships is governed by a set of expectations that are rarely discussed. What are the potential communication challenges of being friends with benefits? Keeping in mind how we briefly discussed benefits. Just think it over or consider your own friendships. Where are you finding that this fits? So how do we work through some of the challenges that we face in our friendships as it relates to communication? These guidelines are here to help you think about what you can do, what works. Again, remember that each relationship is unique. So when there's a violation, an expectation that you have of another individual and it's violated, this can be a serious problem in that relationship. So to avoid these, I think it's important to consider the items listed on this slide. Keep in touch, maintain open and honest communication. Share your feelings honestly. Be transparent. Be comfortable with joys and sorrows. Have memories that you share and laughter. Be a good listener. Be a mindful listener. Maintain confidence. Offer a helping hand. Stand up for each other. Honor the pledges and commitments that you made. And when you can't honor them, you need to be honest about that. And always treat each other with respect. Have a good balance in the exchange of information as you're communicating. And value the importance of connection and autonomy. Being able to understand that independence is viable to healthy relationships. And also being humble, being able to apologize, and also to forgive if there's been a violation. Some of these things are hard for us to do because we've been trained to be different, maybe not. But think about your friendships. Do these guidelines align? Would you say yes, the majority, or which ones don't? Jot it down. For your final project and paper, you get to talk about anything in the course. I'll give you a few guidelines, but you get to pick any of these things. This might have been a chapter that rang a bell for you, that got you some clarity, brought some clarity. You can write about that. So keep in mind that these points that I call aha moments, these are your aha moments, that you can write about them. So I hope that you found at least this half of this lecture interesting. There are a few more guidelines on this slide. Using lists and filters. I mean, that could be described in multiple ways. So I'm a list person, so if I'm working on something with a very close friend, I'll say, okay, you're going to be in charge of this, this, and that. But in order for us to have success, I need you to communicate clearly. So when you get done with this, you let me know so that I can start this part, and then I'll keep you posted when it's done so we can all come together. Remember that while privacy is a goal, it's not guaranteed. There are circumstances where individuals can't protect that privacy. Sometimes very difficult. While it should be very high on the list, it just really depends on the circumstance. But just use good sense. I think that it's really important that you consider guidelines for the relationships that you're engaged with, for your work relationship, all the different friendships that you have. Often we just don't stop and think about what are the guidelines. You need to think about them and balance them. Communication in the family. So family in our textbook has been identified as a system that has two or more interdependent people who have a common history and have a present reality and who expect to influence each other in the future. And when I think of interdependence, I take my hands and lock my fingers together and kind of hold them tight, and you can't pull them apart. That's interdependence. You can loosen them a little, but don't allow them to come completely apart. So families are defined by this common history and a present reality that influences your future. So it's primarily defined through interaction. As in friendships, communication in the family can be identified as a system with two or more interdependent people, but there's a little more to it because they have a common history and a present history. So the family creates communication based on the interaction from day to day. And families also have narratives, the stories that they share. Do they communicate? What are the multiple functions within a family? Do they have mutual goals? Are their values the same? Some families have a strict set of moral values and things have to be that way, but as our children grow, as people change in that family, things might need some adjustments and can cause concern, and it can become very challenging. So our communication rituals and our roles within our family have so much influence on the communication in the family. So some of those rituals can be centered around how we celebrate, maybe birthdays, how we eat meals, or just how we organize each other amongst each other in everyday life. Some of the rules can be explicit, right? So they're out in the open, but some can be implicit. We just have a routine we've developed and we understand. Doris has to get to work by 7:30. Mary doesn't have to get to work until 8. So we only have one bathroom. So we understand it's implicit that Doris gets the bathroom first. And we might have a rule, you have to get done within 25 minutes. So these rituals or rules can govern our communication, and it'll influence how we lead our lives from that point on. So these expectations leave with us, if you will. So families are defined through their interaction. So I'm going to use a metaphor of a house, basic building with 4 walls. Wait, 1, 2, 3, yeah, 4 walls and a roof. If you were to take a wall on the right and a wall on the back off, what would happen? That roof would collapse down to a corner. So it's important that we understand that we operate together. We're a system. Families are a system, a communication system that forms a whole, that completes the whole. So the members interact with one another and complete a whole. Family members are interdependent, as mentioned previously. If one family member is feeling a certain way, it's going to affect everybody else in that household. So remember that a family is more than the sum of its parts. So even if we had all 4 walls and the roof back together, there's more going on inside that building. And so we need to understand each other. We need to understand that we each have extensions, if you will, our outside interactions that also define our interactions. So our systems, our family system is within a larger system, and it's important that we remember that. I think this chapter brings out some really important points for us as we think about our friendships and our family interactions. And I would say a couple of slides that I've highlighted are quite important for you to consider and apply to your own day-to-day. Patterns in our family communication. So we know that we're interdependent, we're bigger than just the sum of our parts. A conversation-oriented family or a conformity-oriented family are 2 types of family communication styles that have been identified. The conversation orientation are those members that interact frequently and freely, and they're spontaneous. It's just flowing. When you think about a fish tank and how the fish are just kind of flowing in, going around, they just do their thing, get out of each other's way, and keep moving. In a conversation orientation family, there's also going to be probably less interaction and less exchange because there's more understanding of our rituals and behaviors. So the degree which family favors an open climate or discussion will be impacted whether a family is high orientated or low orientated. So a low orientated family will interact less, whereas a high oriented will interact more frequently. The conformity aspect comes into play on how we interact with each other, how we exchange, the degree to which we favor our values to be independent, or must they be uniform, our values, beliefs, and attitudes. So a high orientation environment will seek harmony, interdependence, and obedience, whereas a low orientation honors individuality, independence, and equality. So think about the family you grew up in. Were you more of a high conversation, low orientation in the conversation? Were you high conformity or low conformity? Can you see which one, when you stop and think about it, which one fits or suits the family that you grew up in? Now, it may be different since you've moved on. Not that you've left the family behind, but maybe you got married, maybe you moved out, you've been away from home for several years, or you might still be at home, right? But identify which one of these patterns come into play for your personal situation. So now we want to consider the types of conversations that occur in family communication. There's patterns that are developed, rituals that we follow, how we communicate. So conversation and conformity orientation can combine 4 ways that reflect the different family communication patterns. So there's 4 different patterns that have been identified: consensual, pluralistic, protective, and laissez-faire. So consensual is a high conversation, high conformity. So we have a lot of rules in this style of conversation or communication pattern. Pluralistic is a high conversation, low conformity. So we are communicating a lot, but there's a little more freedom in conforming to the way the pattern has to occur in our communication. So consensual is high conformity. Then we have protective. So we have low conversation, but very high conformity. We're going to watch what we say. And then laissez-faire is low in both conversation and conformity. Kick back, chill. You can say whatever you want. This is a free space for you. So we have these 4 patterns: consensual, pluralistic, protective, and laissez-faire. Laissez-faire is the lowest in both conversation and conformity. The highest in conversation and conformity falls into 2 categories. In the consensual. And the protective is a low conversation, not much conversation, but very high conformity. You could also see protective in a high context environment. How do we manage the communication of connection and autonomy? So how do we maintain and balance closeness and boundaries? And so as we look into our family communication, we find that connection autonomy is apparent when children grow into adolescence and those families are successful at working through or negotiating through adolescence with their children. There's a lot of flexibility in that balance, in that dialect of connection and autonomy. Don't let go too much, but give enough freedom so that the adolescent can feel comfortable and the communication remains open constantly. Striving for closeness while respecting boundaries in family communication limits family members' actions. There is a theory known as the communication privacy theory, and it considers the importance of boundary management within the family and the family relationship. So privacy is very high in this process of closeness and respecting boundaries. And encouraging confirming messages. It's important for younger and older children alike to feel comfortable in the environment. So there's not, a hierarchy. There's a balance there. So these are effective communication strategies that can be used. Again, one might work well, while it may not work well, depending also on the children. Let's chat about romantic relationships and what that communication looks like. There are characteristics that tie and keep the relationship close. Of course, love being on the top, the caring, the respect. There is a theory known by Sternberg called the triangular theory of love, and what it maintains is that there are three important components to love in the relationship: the intimacy, the passion, and the commitment. So the intimacy represents the closeness, the connectedness. The passion keeps the physical attraction and the emotional arousal strong. And then the commitment is that rationale, or the rationality to decide to maintain the relationship over time, regardless of what's going right or what's going wrong. So the communication patterns of romantic love, companionship love, and when the love's not felt. And then there's a consummate love, where we have this commitment to come together and fight for what we're trying to achieve in the relationship. So as we reflect on these 3 points in Sternberg's theory of love, can you see the differences in your own relationships? Just take some time as we read our text and we go through the slides to make those connections with the relationships that you're currently in, or a previous relationship that you can recently reflect on. Continuing on these patterns in these various levels of a romantic relationship, remember that relational commitment involves a promise. It's a relationship that has a commitment to be successful. And the love is consummated. There's a commitment there that we're going to be together and we're going to fight for this. Affection is very important. Whether it's verbal or nonverbal, it's important that we express the affection, because it provides a lot of benefits in the relationship with the partners. And I think that as we think about our romantic relationships, we need to take some time to investigate, observe, and understand how we can strengthen these relationships. What can I, as a competent communicator, contribute and give to this relationship? It may seem unbalanced because you're learning new material that makes sense, but you don't want to toss that onto somebody who doesn't have this understanding. You have to work it in, work together, explain it. Be mindful. And being mindful of how you're handling these spurts of growth for you, and how, like, you're saying, oh, I get it. Now I understand why this isn't working, right? But the other person or your partner may not get it because you're at 2 different places and you're learning this from a textbook, from listening, from watching videos. So effective communication in romantic relationships, it's important. It's actually better to give than to receive. And why is that? Why do you think, as the giver, yes, it's more responsibility, but you're gaining more knowledge, more information, and you are learning how to navigate, how to guide the other person. So learning about love languages, how we communicate love, it helps us denote our own notion of what counts as love. Oftentimes we don't know what that really means. We quickly connect it to a feeling, a physical feeling. And so we need to begin to develop a language, I'd say a repository of expressive terms that we can communicate to our partners. For example, words of affirmation, spending quality time together, gifts, acts of service, helping each other find that balance through the affection and physical touch. There has to be a balance. And all of this ties back into communication. We communicate verbally and non-verbally. Again, as mentioned previously, understanding love languages for your relationship. And I think outside of romantic relationships, this can also work in families. I think now that my son is a grown adult, I take into consideration very carefully our quality time. What words of affirmation might he need to feel better as he's going through a struggle? How can I help him grow through that? What can I do to bring a sense of security and affirmation that it's going to be okay, or you're making the right decision? It may not feel like it, but in the future you'll see that it will benefit. So I think that love languages goes across multiple relationships. Another short video that you'll have to go back to the PowerPoint file to watch, but I think it's helpful to look at what this video provides for you. What are they doing that or sharing that seems most familiar or least familiar? What do you think is acceptable? What seems outrageous to you? And why does it seem outrageous? Is it a cultural influence? Is it a comfort influence? As you watch these short clips, I want you to keep those thoughts in mind. Our goal is to become competent communicators at the end of the semester, to have a bag of tools that you can continue with. Some of this might be a little repetitive, but I want to highlight specifically for romantic relationships. Effective communication will involve criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. But what do we do to counter that? We want to foster intimacy. We want to turn towards understanding love languages, appreciation, compliments, asking questions, trusting that you can ask the big questions, having interactions together. They require a lot of fostering of intimacy. So making sure that you're leaning towards connection, whatever that may be, a small act, providing appreciation and compliments, and just being transparent. It's so important. Challenge yourself. What can you do different? And you might find some answers that you might not be so happy with, but that's part of the journey that we're on. So continuing on how you can manage this communication, being clear on what maintenance you need. Go back to the NAPS model. Where are we? Are we in differentiating? Are we close to terminating? What do we need to do to save the relationship? And how much time do you spend with each other? How much time do you spend sharing, being connected? It's really important to manage our communication, but mediated communication is even important. How are we communicating? Who are we communicating frequently with, and why? So keeping that connectedness in your romantic relationship is very important. Under the heading of mediated communication, we can't end this short lecture without discussing the dark side of communication and how we manage digital communication. Often it starts off as a distraction, which is very dangerous because we find that, just take a moment, sit on a bench and watch people in a busy place. Everybody is on their phones now. Everybody's communicating through text, instant messaging, social media. It is incredible. And while it can help maintain a relationship, I find that it has also damaged the connections, the closeness. So I think it's very important, but we need to be very careful because in the digital world, we can think we're getting away with things. We can be blindsided that we're getting away with more things, but in the end, it's not. So think about your boundaries, what's healthy, what's really healthy. Is it really healthy for you? Is it something that's going to torment you years from now? So maintaining balanced relationships is the key, and knowing that there's a dark side to everything that we encounter. Our goal, again, competent communication, making good choices in our responses, and sharing our self-disclosure. Can you identify the different types of friendships and the role that they play? What about describing how communication creates and sustains our relationships within our families? And how is love expressed in our romantic relationships? Each of these points were shared briefly in this lecture.